And those ripples you can even see in like politics. There's this tension between traditional values and relative values. Um, that's kind of still, in a way, um, the different themes or sort of spirit of the times that Kant was responding to. Of, do you hold on to these traditionally built, you might even say divinely inspired um, set of beliefs about the world, and that they're stagnant or constant or perfect, um, whereas do you kind of make your own path and support your own individuality and your culture? Um, Kant would say that reality um, is best understood from what you can test and experience in real life, and that when individual realities don't work, it's because it wasn't objective, and that you should always be on this path of trying to know things in themselves as best you can. You can never know a thing in itself, but you must assume that there is a world that is bigger than you, that you don't understand everything, and therefore you should have humility in response to that. At the same time, you don't need to walk on eggshells and always be trying to make sure that you aren't making bigger claims than you are, because even if you were walking on eggshells, you still don't get around the fact that even your immediate sense observations are still yours. And so in a way, he centers the entire universe on the self. So it's in a way very selfish. But then he says that the entire human reality is not all there is. And so the self is smaller or different, just fundamentally different than what things are in themselves. And so you can be free to be yourself, be an individual, have your reality, under the condition that your understanding acknowledges its own limits. And so Nietzsche came after Kant about 100 years or so, less than that, but kind of more or less about one or two generations later. And he was supporting this idea of perspectivism. He wasn't acknowledging it that explicitly, but really trying to blow up people's individual views and then reestablish them on the individual. So blowing up the idea that God is just real, and saying God is dead, and that we killed God, that our dogmatization of the real world has made us inactive, passive. We've become obsessed with being right and concepts, and we've forgotten about the real world. And so because the world is unavoidably yours, jump out. This, be free, like love life, love the life that's in everything else, and be brave. And Kant was not nearly as a passionate thinker or speaker, but kind of this zeitgeist of your own freedom wasn't necessarily inspired by Nietzsche and then inherited from Kant, but you can see that genealogy of thought, like how humans want to be free. You can see that played out in this historical transition. Kant was saying we don't know the world as it is in itself, but we can have positive knowledge of the world as phenomena, as appearance, and that we don't know anything else beyond that. But we should be humble because the world might be more, and that we should take it on faith. We should hold faith as being a central tenet of our reality, and that we are, in Kant's view, we are image bearers of God, in the sense of God is the divine order, and that we are in pursuit of the divine order, but we can never know God in himself. And so just like we can't know our souls in themselves, like we don't know the depths of our own person, we don't know them completely. There's things about us that we may never know. Think of all the billions of cells in your body that are doing things that you can never acknowledge from the inside. There are plenty of things like that we just cannot know. A black hole, what goes in there, we'll probably never know. There are things that we can't know. And so we can have freedom and truth within our own realm, but at the edge of our realm, there's a nothingness that we can't enter, and so we basically can find hope in the world that we know, because it is real. It is a real world, and we shouldn't be up in our minds playing games for game's sake. Just to basically make beliefs up, simply to then enforce them. We can play games, we can imagine, but we must understand that as not conflated with the real world. Mathematics, science, all the truths of science, all the truths of philosophy, all the different kinds of principles that people have, that's not what life is all about. Those things are small. They're very small. They're very insignificant compared to the sense world, and therefore we don't need to worry too much about being right. We should live, and we should try to know the world the best we can, but we don't have a clear path laid before us. All we know is that there are limits to our understanding, and Kant tries to limit that to the sensible world. Kant, it's probably worth talking about Kant just a little bit. He was a nerd, definitely. He was single his whole life. He never left more than 15 miles from home in Königsberg, Prussia, which is now Poland. He spoke German. He had a small group of friends, and he apparently was a rather chipper, sprightly individual at dinner. He was fun and playful and whimsical, but kind of shy and reserved, and so he wasn't like this explosive, brave personality. Kind of the things that I was describing are more of implications from a Kantian view. He was very kind of regular. He would go on walks so regular every afternoon that they said that the women of Königsberg would set their clocks to Kant's afternoon walks. And so he was kind of like a clock. He had these regular things, but then he was just this kind of whimsical personality. And he is not a very direct thinker. He spends a lot of times going in all these little thought bubbles because he's always looking at the big picture, and he's just overwhelmed by that. And I think that legacy is important. That looking at the world with this big-eyed view is a really valuable thing to hold. To not assume too much, and also to not worry about the details all the time, because the details are still yours. Basically, it's very hard to be wrong to yourself, because the entire world is yours, and but your reality is limited. And so basically you should try and have a universal principle of how to act, so that you can be true to all humans and all life. You should try and know things in as complete a picture as possible. Your version is complete, but you are limited, and so you can have complete knowledge of your own world, but your own world is not the only world. And so basically there is a world. Kant will say that there is a world, a real world, that none of us can know, and in its essence we can know it as knowledge, and that science is basically the most universal form of knowledge. It's when everybody's different little worlds, when you take all their observations and put them into a big pile, what comes out is knowledge, scientific knowledge, and it has to be sensed data, not just beliefs. Has to work in practice. And that's kind of Kant's legacy. Again, big landmark in human history, initiated what we call a Copernican revolution, saying that the Earth isn't the center of the universe, but the sun, the same, is the opposite true for the mind. The entire world is ours.